Welcome back to another episode of the Pax What She Said podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Maggie Loney, joined as always by Perri Goldstein and Penny the cat, who you may or may not see as we are recording this episode, see or hear. This week, looking at the undrafted free agents that signed with Green Bay after the draft and talking about mandatory rookie minicamp. Always fun to see the rookies kind of come into Lambeau Field, get their helmets on, get their jerseys on for the first time, and it's probably when it feels very real and becomes kind of official for a lot of these guys that have had these aspirations for a long time. So always a really fun week to kind of see social media and see how the rookies are reacting to being at Lambeau. So Perri, how are you doing before we get started?
How am I personally doing?
How are you personally doing?
I'm good. It's crazy that I feel like the off season is kind of like the draft is a very like dividing time, right? There's like pre-draft and post-draft. And when you're on the other side of the draft, it's like you're kind of in the home stretch until the season starts. You know, you got your guys, everyone's in. Like this is more or less like who you're going to be working with on the roster. So wild that we get to like really focus now. And I'm very excited about it. And may or may not see me around Lambeau in August. Can't wait for that too.
Love a teaser. And I mean, to your point, I was thinking you said like these are the guys that we're theoretically going to be working with. And yeah, I mean, Keyshawn Nixon came late. Devondre Campbell came late, but I was just thinking about this roster and the fact that normally it's like, okay, maybe they didn't get an inside linebacker in the draft, so they took Campbell, or maybe they weren't sure about the depth at corner, so they grabbed Nixon primarily to be a returner. It's really hard to find a position group right now after the draft and these undrafted free agents have come in where it's like, oh, I don't know, like I don't feel that good, like. And that's me personally. Maybe you feel differently, but it really feels like every kind of question mark we had, the Packers addressed in some capacity, to the point that I'm not sure there's room necessarily in some of these rooms to add bodies.
No, I feel the exact same way. I think, you look at this team on paper. Obviously, all we're working with right now is on paper. And you kind of say, okay, well, is there an area that I'm still concerned about? Is there still like a major area of need? Is there going into the season, am I still concerned? And yes, there's like areas that are stronger than others for sure. We could like go into that. But I think holistically, the roster is pretty filled out. I mean, they're to answer all those questions, like, no, there isn't really an area that I'm too concerned about. I mean, even going into 2023, we felt like, okay, this team is looking really good, but they didn't really address safety, and things like that. So we knew going into the season, there are areas of weakness. Now, naturally, there's going to be areas of weakness, and we'll find them as the season rolls along, like injuries happen, etc. But I think they're in a very good, like strong position going into camp and going into the season.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I think that's what makes some of these opportunities at like a rookie minicamp a lot more enticing, right? Is trying to find the areas that there potentially is room for improvement. And we hear about that every year, right? And when teams are filling out their practice squads in late August, early September, is where can you latch on someplace where you feel like you'll have an opportunity, because there's certain rooms that are just already deep. And so let's dive into that a little bit and look at some of the undrafted free agents that the Packers brought in, and then we can talk about minicamp. So is there anyone that stood out to you immediately on their list? We're not going to go through every single one because it does change kind of throughout the minicamp process, but any names you saw that you were like, oh, nice, I'm glad they got so-and-so.
Okay, well, no one that I was like, oh, nice, I'm glad they got so-and-so. But they brought in a few guys. I mean, they brought in a lot of guys on the trenches, which I think obviously like makes sense. I think if you're like gonna fill in depth anywhere, it's gonna be there, and just kind of see if you can find like a sleeper. The one that intrigues me the most is tight end Messiah Swinson. He's out of Arizona State, but I mean, besides that, he's actually from out where my dad grew up, which is fun that he's a Long Island boy. But besides that, besides the hometown thing, the reason why he intrigues me is he's like, first, they didn't draft a tight end, right, in the draft. So he's kind of their only addition to that room besides getting Tyler Davis back from his ACL. But he's huge. I mean, he's like Mercedes Lewis size, right? He's like 6'8", I think, somewhere around like the 250, 260 pound. He ran, I'm looking here, he ran his 44.85. So he's like a big dude, super, super fast. So I don't know. I mean, again, he's an undrafted free agent. We'll see what they can do with him. But I think in terms of like that size tight end, pretty good to have a guy like that just like around and see what he can do in the blocking and the pass game. So I'm intrigued to just like see him. Also, there's just like not that many people who are like physically that large.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought him up because he was a name that I was also, eyeing. And it kind of reminds me of Ben Sims a little bit. Ben Sims was an undrafted free agent. He originally signed with the Vikings, but still, like the Packers find some gems that they really like and they keep tabs on. And, if, Ben Sims became available, they snatched him up. So the fact that they have Swinson in, I think shows that they're interested and potentially, he's competing absolutely for a roster spot. Another name that I noticed right away was Donovan Jennings from South Florida. He's an offensive lineman. He, I thought, would go day 3. And I don't know if the Packers kind of knew that he would slip undrafted or if it was just somebody they were willing to gamble on. But I'd seen projections to go as high as like the 6th round. And he's just a really freaky relative athletic score athlete, big guy, probably can be a swing tackle at this level. So he's another one of those prospects that, the Packers are keeping an eye on. He took a top 30 visit in Green Bay. So somebody that they absolutely did their homework on when it comes to the offensive line. And like you said, that there's always opportunities there for those guys to compete. And I would almost like pencil in a practice squad spot for him now if he didn't get snatched up already.
I'd be curious for like anyone out there who tracks this stuff, because we know about some of the undrafted success stories in Green Bay. I mean, there's many. I'm be curious when the last time an undrafted offensive lineman started for the Packers. If anybody listening has that fun stat.
Do you mean like started in general? Like just made a
Not like made the roster, because I know that there probably is, but like it was like a significant starter. Because we can think of weapons, right? And of course there's corners, naturally. But I can't think of an offensive lineman off the top of my
the only one
head.
that comes to mind for me immediately is Justin McCray. But
He was a free agent?
the Packers didn't bring him in right away. He went to Tennessee first. And then
Okay.
he went to like the minor leagues and then he signed with Green Bay like after the fact.
Interesting. I didn't know that. There we
So,
go. Okay, Maggie knew.
well, I mean, there might have been one more recently, but of course, that's the the name that comes to my mind.
Yeah.
Before we shift into minicamp, one other name I thought was really interesting here is Peter Bowden, the long snapper from Wisconsin. And I know long snapper is not like an, oh my God, how enticing kind of position to talk about, but I think it's worth noting because the Packers last season or 2 seasons ago at this point, I honestly can't remember, brought in the Rams long snapper, Matt
Mhm.
Orzich, right after he won the Super Bowl with the Rams. And we were like, oh, finally a vet at the position. And the special teams unit didn't necessarily seem like it improved dramatically. So I'm curious if that's like a true competition with Bowden coming in and being on the roster carrying 2 long snappers, or honestly, if it's a convenience factor at this point, given how many kickers they have on the roster right now competing. So another
Yeah.
interesting one that I just thought was, noteworthy when I saw the list.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we said it before, but special teams is probably the area of weakness at the moment. Given just how they've been underperforming the last few seasons under Rich Bisaccia. I mean, is this a hot take? Is this make or break season for Rich Bisaccia and his special teams unit?
I don't think that's a hot take. I think, we see the ascension of the defense that we're hoping. I guess there's no, proof yet, but with Halfley and we saw the offense and the trajectory that they were on. So, yeah, special teams is the head scratcher and I think it's Nick, I think that makes a lot of sense as to why they brought Nixon back because he was a spark plug. And I'm curious, I guess this is a topic for another day, but how the special teams like kickoff rules will change potentially the output on special teams this year for the Packers and for the rest of the NFL, to see if it actually changes the dynamic of special teams. But let's go ahead then and shift gears into rookie minicamp. Obviously, we are not there. We don't have press badges. So what we're seeing is things that players have tweeted,
Unfortunately.
right? Things from analysts, sights and sounds. And again, take it all with a really big grain of salt, because we are doing this on May 7th. And, guys have barely had pads on at this point. But anyone that you were like really excited to get initial reports on, or any players that you were watching really closely?
I mean, the whole class, naturally. It's been fun to hear about first round pick Jordan Morgan. I feel like the coaches go out of their way to talk about him in every press conference. I feel like we've been hearing a ton of buzz about Kalen King, like a ton. So for a 7th round pick, a few thoughts here. One is everyone seems, and by everyone I mean coaches and press, seems super pumped about him, how he looks, etc., which fits with the narrative of, a little confusion around why he fell to where he fell. He could potentially be a steal. Obviously, we will not know that until a little bit further into the future. To me, it's still like, can no one explain why he fell? Not that it matters, right? Now that you're in the building, it like legitimately doesn't matter where you were picked. But I do think it's interesting that like when asked about it, the coaches kind of don't really have an answer. Just like a side note to that. But everyone says he looks great. He's playing on the boundary. They think he can play anywhere, super aggressive, like coming in like to the building. Obviously, we listened to his post-draft press conference, and he is bringing like kind of that same energy to practice, very hungry, very ready to like prove himself. So hearing a lot of buzz about Kalen King. But for me, I mean, I think my guy who's gonna remain through training camp, I mean, still a lot of ball game left, as our friend Aaron Nagler says, is Marshawn Lloyd. I am just really pumped about him. I think I've just been seeing that he is bringing a lot of juice. I think that's the word that I would use to describe him. And that he is fitting in really well with that running back room. Look, there's no pads, right? So it's kind of hard to tell what's going on out there. But those are kind of the three guys that I've enjoyed hearing about.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'm gonna take it in a different direction. And to me, it was the safeties, right? The Packers drafted 3 of them. I wanted to see initially kind of where they would fit or where the Packers would utilize them. And I thought it was really interesting to see that Ketan Oladapo had broken his toe at the combine. And he still had like a really high RAS, still tested really well. But you wonder, maybe if he would have tested a little bit better, or how that affected some of his mobility and agility when he broke his toe literally running drills at the combine. And I think he still went on and did his pro day as well, but needed some surgery to fix that, obviously. So he's not out there with the rest of the safeties. But I just thought that was kind of like a unique tidbit that all of a sudden we're finding out after the fact that he, did suffer at the combine, the broken toe. But Javon Bullard and Evan Williams as well. I think it just has a lot of potential, the trio, and how they're going to be utilized. Javon Bullard, I think, actually both of them, really, Williams too, they both fit as like such ideal nickel candidates, as well as if you want to play them in the box or kind of free safety floating around. So those are the names that stood out to me immediately, was the same way you looked at Kalen King, just seeing where the Packers might use all 3 of those guys.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's going to be pretty high on the list naturally, I think, as well, especially when you got everybody in the building. It's like, who is going to be out there next to Xavier McKinney with the ones? My hunch is going to be it's Javon Bullard, but right, it could be anybody. It could be a rotation. Again, depending on what they want to do and how they want to use him. Is Keyshawn Nixon. We are obviously assuming, based on last season, based on his new paycheck, that he is the starting nickel, but they have a lot of options now with what they want to do. And to take it a little bit in a different direction too is like, I think the biggest question mark besides obviously the individual pieces, because we won't know what these guys look like until they play on the field, is Jeff Hafley's defense.
Right.
Right? Like we know what to expect from Matt LaFleur and his offense. You know, there's going to be some fun new wrinkles. Obviously, he has some new toys, but we have a black box right now, especially so because this isn't even a guy who was hired out of the NFL. I mean, it's not like we can go back and say like, oh, well, when he coached at X team or when he did this. I mean, this is like truly, truly, I called it on Pack a Day a beautiful mystery as a joke, to quote 12. But like it's a big mystery. So we're just starting to get glimpses, but mostly we're just getting Jeff talking at the podium about his new look defense and about some of the new guys that are in the building. So I'm curious if you were able to listen to anything he said and what your thoughts are, because I think there were some like kind of like things that stood out to me about what he thinks about some of the new defensive players that he's getting, or just the way he's going to like run his defense in general, and like the way he feels about being in the building. But just curious your thoughts there.
Nothing like specifically, but it did give me a sense of like, I think that the Hopper selection, right, in the draft was probably the most polarizing one that the Packers made, because everyone was like, well, they just took Edge Cooper. Why would they go on and take another inside linebacker? But when you think about like holistically, and again, we're just, it's like X's and O's and at this point, but to talk about going into a 4-3 base, even though yes, we know you play a lot of 4-2-5 in base nowadays, like to have such athletic inside linebackers, I think is like truly paramount in a Jeff Hafley defense. And we talked about the way that like the Packers could utilize Quay Walker on blitz packages, like bringing 7 or bringing your inside backers before we even knew what this draft class looked like. So I think just the buzzword that we kind of talked about coming out of the draft was versatility. And
Mm-hmm.
we really saw that with the safeties. We saw that with the inside linebackers, and we saw that with the offensive line as well, even though obviously not a position that plays defense. So I think that's just like, his comments made me more excited about how a lot of these guys are interchangeable and all the different sub packages we might see. Even
Yeah.
in like a 4-2-5, you might have different variations of which 2 linebackers are out there at a time, or, what you're having Xavier McKinney do versus what you're having some of your rookies do. And just the freedom I think that they'll have to mix up a lot of these pieces.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it was, I mean, it was pretty coach speak, right? Naturally, but I mean, I think it's interesting to hear the way he wants to use some of these guys,
Mhm.
to your point, like the way he wants to, and you're seeing it on the field too, how he has, 4 down linemen with their hands in the dirt, not something that we've seen in the past, for example. We're naturally not going to see everything that he wants to do. I mean, probably not until week 1. But just some of the changes and the ways he wants to use guys, especially kind of in that more like middle of the defense. Um, I think the way he describes like the energy in the building, that was probably what stood out to me more than anything else. And again, like he's a guy coming from college. He hasn't been in an NFL locker room in a number of years, and he also hasn't been an NFL coordinator like ever. So it could just be first time, but there is something, and this happens every year. You know, and I don't think this is like a homer take, but you walk into Lambeau, these rookies are seeing Lambeau Field for the first time. Jeff Hafley's walking into Lambeau Field for the first time. You're also walking into a locker room full of guys who are heading into a season that is full of pretty lofty expectations,
Yeah.
as they should. And you're getting like a certain buzz around the building. And I'm sure, not that the vets are in the room just yet with them, but I'm sure getting a new defensive coordinator and shaking things up on that side of the ball after the probably disappointment that they feel in the way that they have, the production hasn't really been there the last few seasons, um, is probably going to even elevate it even more once they're there. I can imagine what it feels like there right now, right? So I think it was cool to hear him describe it. it's pretty cool that he's also a rookie, I guess,
Hmm.
technically. Like, this is his rookie minicamp also. I was thinking about that, experiencing it for the first time. So I like getting that like side of things because we're never gonna be in there and like feel that with them. So I love when coaches come out and describe it in that way. But also good because you could tell that was the energy from the draft picks after the draft, just the way that they reacted to getting picked and all of their interviews. But it's nice to hear that it's carried over into practice.
Yeah, that energy piece is always a lot of fun. And I was thinking about that too as you said it, so I'm glad you mentioned it, that like not saying that there's like a level playing field at this point because there are vets in the room and obviously like Preston Smith doesn't come in with the same like nerves and needing to prove himself that some like an Evan might, but I do think it's funny that like you're talking about the fact that Jeff Hafley is technically coming into his own rookie mini camp. One last point, before we wrap up, that I just curious your thoughts on if you think it matters or makes a difference. I was surprised. I'm sure you were also surprised to see that quarterback Alex Magoo transitioned to wide receiver. So the Packers now have 11 wide receivers on the roster because they brought in a couple for rookie minicamp that stuck around. So in an already really crowded room, I think it's cool that he was doing it on scout team and they decided to switch him over but I'm curious, like, do you think this is a better avenue than quarterback because they've got Sean Clifford, they just brought in Pratt. So like, I don't know, are the odds better for you in this wide receiver room or are they, you know, no?
No, definitely not. I mean, it's an interesting choice for sure. I think the odds are probably more stacked against you. You're also like behind the eight ball at this point because you're switching positions at age 29. I think you're more likely to cling to a roster as a third string quarterback than a eighth or ninth wide receiver. I have no doubt he's super athletic. I have no doubt that he could probably play receiver. I mean, isn't he the one that injured Jair on scout team last year?
I don't remember that, but
So
that would be funny. Not funny,
playing
but in a cosmic sort of way.
like playing like tight end or whatever he was playing. But I just think it's a very interesting career choice to make at this stage of your career when you've been playing one position for so long.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is interesting. And it sounded like LaFleur basically was like, we saw him out there. He was doing it so much on scout team and he looked good at it and he's so athletic that we were like, yeah, sure, like see what happens. But I mean, he also has, the really strong USFL pedigree and potentially is already quarterback 4 on the depth chart, so maybe he thinks, "Hey, let's see what happens." Wide
Yeah.
receivers get banged up very easily and it'll be fun to see in the preseason, like that transition to see like how clean his routes are and things like that. That's just interesting to me. I love anytime players try to make like a position switch. Normally it's like wide receiver to corner, not necessarily quarterback to wide receiver, but will still be interesting.
It'll be interesting. Yeah. I guess we'll find out how it goes for him.
It was like a couple of years ago when James Loney
Yeah.
went from D line to tight end. I was like, that
I
I'm gonna
mean,
need to see.
it just doesn't normally go well. It doesn't normally pan out. So that's why I find it a really interesting choice, especially when I just think it's probably easier to stick to a roster as a third string quarterback. But hey, teach their own.
Yeah, and I mean, dude won an MVP with the USFL as a quarterback, so it's good.
Yeah.
Like you'd think you'd be on a practice squad at least somewhere, but
Yeah.
yeah,
100%.
it's just that's an interesting one. But any final thoughts about the rookie class that's coming in, the rookie minicamp, before we wrap up this week, and hopefully have maybe a schedule to talk about next week.
Maybe. Well, we already know where the Packers are playing on week 1, so we're
True.
a little bit ahead of other teams, which is nice. Um, I think I'm really pumped about some of these new weapons that the Packers have. I think they have some ballers that are coming in. I think at some point this offseason we will do a few deep dives as well. We'll do a little bit more in depth on each of them, but so far liking what I see. And yeah, ready for everyone to get in the building and just see how this team starts meshing together.
Yeah, I think to me the biggest, I guess you can't even call it a surprise, but I thought it was interesting that Goot signed Andre Dillard, like former first round pick, offensive lineman, very valuable position. Made a ton of sense the Goot way to do that. And then went in and drafted 3 linemen and then brought in a ton of UDFAs. Like that, we say it every year that the offensive line room is like the toughest battle of camp. But genuinely, I'm not sure that I think there's like one, maybe 2 spots on the offensive line that are actually locked up, and it's Elton Jenkins and wherever they decide to play Zach Tom.
Yeah.
Like, like I don't know where he's playing, but I think he gets a starting 5 job, bar none. Everyone else, it's like, hey, we'll see. And I feel like it's been a long time since the Packers have had that. We talk about them having like 1 or 2 spots that are going to be competitions, but normally they have vets at all the positions. And this is probably the first time we're going in wondering, like, oh, shoot, it could be anybody.
And it's going to be, I mean, it's not just to your point, the first time in a while that there's like mad competition, but also arguably the most important piece of this team to lock down because you're protecting the franchise QB and nothing is going to run through this offense. Everything that they've done, nothing is going to happen if they can't protect Jordan Love and allow him to like do what he needs to do to get the ball out. And I think also his development is take a serious hit if he's not being protected, right? And he has to scramble around and drop his eyes and like try to do too much, and he can't play like through his reads. Because he was wonderful last season, right? And he could do some things off script, but he needs to be able to build on that. It's not he could regress, right? If he can't. So super, super key. Super key.
Yeah, really excited to kind of dive deeper into a lot of these individual positions. I'm sure we'll have a ton of off-season content to go through all of those a little more granularly. But thank you for joining us for Backstreet's Podcast. This is all the time that we've got for today's show. You can follow the show on YouTube if you don't already. Make sure you like and subscribe. We appreciate all of the clicks and all of the views. If you're listening in the audio format, we appreciate that as well. Thank you so much for downloading each episode. It helps out our numbers tremendously. You can find the podcast on Twitter at PWSS Podcast. You can find Perri at Perri_Goldstein, at Maggie J. Loney for me. And that is all the time that we've got. So go Pack, go.
Go Pack, go.